I'm Natalia. I'm the solutions architect on the cloud optimization success team at AWS. I will later, at the end of the presentation, if you have time, I will tell you what our team is doing and what our team is about. But effectively, it's about cloud optimization, and it's also about all well architected. So that's why this is what I'm going to talk about today. Now, before we go into any discussing any best practices or recommendations, I wanted to ask, so can a few people tell me, like in a short kind of phrase or in a few words, so what comes to your mind when you hear cloud optimization or when you hear AWS optimization or just optimization? So what is the first thing that comes to mind?
Cost.
Of course. Anything else?
Performance and the response to the customer in line with that, and how responsive the customer is.
Okay, performance and how responsive the customer is. Okay, cost. Yes, that would be first thing that I would say as well. Any other just kind of small, maybe anything to do with architecture? Security. Okay, good. Okay, yeah. So those are some really good points, and again, I hear cost all the time. So every time we say cloud optimization, AWS optimization, our customers they are hearing cost optimization. But then when we come back to this topic of cost optimization and providing recommendations to customers how to be more cost optimized, most of the customers or partners or even people internally that I work with at AWS, probably the first thing that they will say or the first thing that will come to their mind will be, oh, reserved instances, savings plans, spot, let's do some of that. And I get a little bit upset because optimization is much more than that. And yes, it's security, performance, and it's about architecture. So today we will go a little bit slightly to the basics, to the foundations, and we will see what we can do, which tools we use and techniques, and which processes we can implement in our organizations to be more efficient and to combine all of these elements, security, cost, performance, how to make those trade-offs. So this is how we at AWS, this is how we approach this topic of cloud optimization. So we want to provide you a framework, or we want to provide our customers a framework and the best practices that will help you achieve the maximum business outcomes or the maximum business value through the processes of continuous improvement. Now, the whole idea of continuous improvement is not new. It's something that organizations have been doing for so long. But every time I talk to technical people about business outcomes, they sort of phase out because very often technical people don't really care about that. They say, oh yeah, just give me something to code, just give me something to explore and experiment, and I want to learn all this new technology. But this is very important. If technology and business don't align, then that business cannot grow and cannot scale. It will sort of, let's say, for example, if you start a startup, if you fund. Yeah, basically, if you start a startup and you don't implement this continuous improvement processes and you don't think of the strategy and business outcomes and how you're going to achieve those outcomes with the technology, you will not be able to scale, and potentially become bigger or as big as AWS and Amazon. Yeah. So we provide these frameworks and best practices, and we want our customers to be efficient. We don't want them to waste money or waste resources. We want them to be able to make the right architectural trade-offs by combining technology, people, and processes. So that's what I mentioned, that you can't just solve everything with technology. You also need people who create that technology. And you also need continuous processes that can turn into these mechanisms that will effectively, get you to the scale where you potentially want to go. And all of this also can be done through the tools and techniques that we provide or we recommend from the AWS side. And from our side, we also say that you can do this through the processes of automated and conversational discovery. So I'll talk about a couple of examples, some of the tools that you can use. But by doing all of this, hopefully you will achieve those ultimate business outcomes that you want to achieve, and also you will be using the technology that is helping you to achieve it. And the engineering, the development teams will be happy because they will be involved in all this cool tech. And this process is not easy, and implementing this in an organization is not easy. But that's why we have the well-architected framework. So the whole purpose, the goal of well-architected framework is to combine this people, processes, and technology, and provide you the set of best practices. Now, the thing that very often happens is that these best practices evolve over time, right? The technology doesn't just stand in place. Sometimes we develop, we design, we create our workloads with certain best practices in mind. But let's say if we created an application 5-10 years ago, those best practices were slightly different. So now a lot of new, tools and technology evolves, and you will need to have some sort of process to review and re-evaluate whether you are still following those best practices. So creating an application or creating a workload is a lot like constructing a physical building. If that foundation is not solid, then it can undermine the structural integrity of the building. That's why we have the 6 pillars of well-architected. Who is familiar with the pillars? Who knows what is the well-architected review process, anything like that? Okay, so we have a few people who are familiar. So this is basically the foundation of how you should be, running, creating, building, architecting, and operating workloads on AWS. Just for a little bit of history, the well-architected framework was sort of started and created around 2012. And since then, again, as everything in technology, it evolved. So originally, it was interesting. It's like a bunch of solution architects at AWS were working with their customers, and then they were collecting all these best practices from the way how customers are doing things. And then it all started from just an Excel spreadsheet with some best practices and recommendations. And then throughout so for the last 10, 12 years now, it evolved. So the operational excellence pillar was launched in 2016, and then sustainability was added as a pillar also a couple of years ago. But it all started from the initial 4 pillars: performance, reliability, security, and cost. And that's something what I saw people sort of mentioned, when I asked, what do you think when you hear optimization? So now, with that in mind, we need to kind of think of how do we make this architectural trade-offs, which tools we use, which techniques are available. It's not an easy task, but we have a couple of examples that we can share how you could potentially implement it in your organization. So if some of you are not familiar with this tool, so the AWS Well Architected tool, this is where you will have this whole set of these best practices across all of the 6 pillars. And the Well Architected tool is commonly used by our customers, partners. We also have the Well Architected certified partners who perform Well Architected reviews with other customers. This is where you will find all of these best practices, and you will be able to reevaluate how well your workload is designed, developed, how well you're operating it. So this tool is actually free, so it can be used, on the account as long as you have the permissions. So of course, that's always a caveat for any services that you use, for any tools and features that we have available in AWS. You need to have the required permissions. But this tool is free, and running through, sort of defining the workload and running through these best practices and looking through these questions sort of will not cost you anything apart from your time. So we will talk later about where do we find that time and how we should be doing this better. But this is the example of this conversational discovery. So, for example, what we do as solution architects when we go talk to customers, when we perform a well-architected review, we sit in a room. Well, first of all, we have a preparation process. We need to have the right stakeholders in a room. We need to kind of explain them how this will go. But whenever we get to the review process, we sit in a room, we talk about their workload, the architecture, how it was designed, who is responsible and accountable for different elements. Ideally, those people should be in the room because this is where we want to find these opportunities to improve. This is where we want to find potential, maybe risks that ideally we should be eliminating because nobody wants to be in a situation when there is like an event or things fail, and as we know, things fail all the time, even though we don't want them to fail, and it's not always our fault, it's not always customers' fault. Things go out of control. There's like a fire in data center. You never know. So so the whole process of the well-architected review allows you to go through these potential scenarios or best practices to avoid any potential failures, issues, problems, or like performance problems, but also do all of this at the lowest price point. So remember, I was talking about the outcomes and delivering business value. So all of this, across all of the 6 pillars, has to be done in balance. But ideally at the lowest price point. So this is how we sort of approach this idea of optimization. So this is one example of the tool that we have, and example of the conversational discovery type of workload exploration. And another tool is for the automated discovery. Now, again, when I'm talking to technical people, usually they are not so keen to sitting in a room with, maybe finance and business people and just talking about their workloads. They want to have tools available at their disposal to do this automatically, to remove all of this like manual operational overhead, right? Who is familiar with Trusted Advisor? On a high level, at least. So Trusted Advisor is also a free tool, though there is currently like a caveat that your accounts need to have either business, enterprise on RAM, or enterprise support for you to avail of the full range of all the checks. So I would suspect, well, yeah, I would suspect that not all of your accounts potentially will have this level of premium support. But we are working with some of our product teams, and particularly Trusted Advisor team, to expand those checks to be able to explore the workloads and resources in their accounts, even if they don't have this highest level of paid support. So if you have, let's say, basic support or developer support, at the moment in Trusted Advisor, you will see a bunch of basic security checks, because again, for us, security is like a job zero. It's the most important pillar out of them all. Though some people would argue, for some people, cost will be the most important pillar. It really depends on those business outcomes that I mentioned initially, and the priorities that you have in your organization. But in Trusted Advisor, if your accounts have those levels of support, then you will have more than 400 best practice checks that are analyzing your environments. They are analyzing your resources across dozens of AWS services and providing recommendations to improve. And those recommendations are across also several pillars. So originally in Trusted Advisor, we had cost optimization, performance, security, fault tolerance, and service limits. And in the previous session about DynamoDB, so there was something mentioned about service limits. So like, for example, in Trusted Advisor, there is a separate pillar, service limits, that you can utilize to get automatically notified in case you start getting closer to those limits, either account limits or service limits that you might be soon hitting. So to avoid any kind of disruption and to avoid any issues with not being able to run your potentially production workloads, it's a good idea to, for example, monitor those service limits automatically. And very recently, there was also added a operational excellence pillar inside Trusted Advisor, because now we are creating a very close kind of alignment between Trusted Advisor and Well Architected, because we were getting a lot of questions from customers. What's the difference between Well Architected and Trusted Advisor? In one case, you can see in the Well Architected, let's say, tool, you have all of the 6 pillars, and you have these best practices and questions that you can go through to evaluate whether your workload is actually aligning with those best practices or not. But the same thing is going on in Trusted Advisor, which one I should look into. So now we have this alignment and kind of integration between Well Architected tool and Trusted Advisor. And if, let's say, you're doing a workload review, Well Architected framework review, against your workload in the tool, in the Well Architected tool, you will also be able to see in some of the tabs the relevant Trusted Advisor automated checks. So it automates this process of this review slightly in a way that it would be easy for you to understand and then potentially implement some of the remediation. So a couple of examples, it could be any of the security checks related to, let's say, S3 buckets open to the world or certain ports open to the world that potentially shouldn't be open if it's not a production workload. And then this would be captured by the Trusted Advisor. And then if you perform this review, Well Architected review against your workload, then some of the best practices within Well Architected on the security side would be to restrict access to the resources depending on who needs to have access to what. So whenever you perform the review, then you will be able to also look at both tools now. So these are some of these examples of the tools and techniques and how you can combine this technology with people and processes and this conversational discovery. Ideally, you would sit in a room with technical people and maybe business stakeholders. It could be somebody like a head of architecture, a head of cloud operations. Those would be your main kind of sponsors for this kind of exercise of, let's call it overall as a cloud optimization exercise. And getting to the point of understanding how well your workload that you're running on AWS is performing against those best practices. And just as a side point is that you don't really have to do this reviews just on AWS workloads. You can as well use the same best practices for any hybrid workloads that you have with your own data center or even other clouds, because the best practices themselves, they are generally universal, across, regardless of the technology that you use. Now, the question that we often get from customers is, okay, this is all great and amazing, but how do we prioritize? We have these 6 pillars, and sometimes they say, oh, we need to do this workload review, but it will take us several days, and we don't know where do we start. Because seemingly all the pillars are important, right? None of the pillars are really more important than others, even though some of us have favorite pillars. Cost optimization is my favorite pillar. I used to be a specialist in cost optimization, the previous role. So that's why, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me later specifically about cost. But then, architecture is about trade-offs. So very often the case will be that let's say, how do you balance between performance and cost optimization? For example, we have a tool called Compute Optimizer. It's, again, also a free tool that will provide you, and available on all accounts regardless of the support level, just for the record. Compute Optimizer can provide you recommendations to improve efficiency of your workloads. So it would provide you recommendations on about EC2 instances, like right-sizing recommendations, EBS volumes, Lambda functions, like instances within the auto-scaling group, and recently also the RDS instances were added to Compute Optimizer. So you have this whole set of recommendations where we tell you, how you can run your workloads more efficiently, because, well, we don't want you to overspend, and we want you to run as performant workloads as possible. So, in Compute Optimizer in particular, for example, if you look at the right-sizing recommendations for EC2, the recommendation can be either to go size down or to go size up, depending on whether we are trying to optimize for performance or whether we are trying to optimize for cost. And these recommendations will be based on the utilization metrics of those resources. So the tool will look at the trend for those metrics, like CPU, memory, or network sort of in and out of those resources, and then make the required recommendation. Now, coming back to the question again of the business outcomes and how do you make these trade-offs between different pillars, it all really depends on which priorities you have inside your organization. So, and this is where it's important to have this partnership between engineering teams and more business or finance-related teams. It's important to have them in a room talking to each other and understanding each of their own goals. So, of course, developers will be keen to explore new technology, and finance team might come up and say, "Oh, we can't really have you experimenting. We don't have the budget." So, and then engineers will be like, "Well, then increase the budget." But yeah, sometimes this conversation doesn't go very well. But if both of those teams would sort of refer back to their business strategy and the business outcomes that they're trying to achieve, the conversation would go much smoothly. Like, for example, if it's a company that's like, let's say, delivering pizza, right? So the, let's say, business objective or business outcome is to deliver more pizza, to get more revenue, to get more money, to have customer satisfaction. So those are sort of the objectives. But again, our developers care more about whatever they are creating, their code, potentially they're making that code more optimized. Like, they don't really think in those business terms in most cases, right? So that's why when these people come together to talk and discuss their common goals, ideally we recommend customers then to prioritize which pillars you focus on based on the urgency of an issue, if there's any immediate issue or problem to solve, plus together paired with the business impact. So again, if there is a security incident, there's a high chance that the business will not care that much about the cost of trying to fix that security incident because, potentially reputation is on the line. A lot of companies often start from the cost optimization as the pillar, but very often they do this because they are like in a firefighting mode. So they sort of start from this perceived high bill, and then they say that, oh, cost optimization, it means that we need to reduce the bill. But again, as we mentioned before, it's not only about the bill. It's not only about the tools that we use and the techniques that we use to implement those recommendations, how we implement optimization, but it's also people and processes. If the mindset doesn't change, if we don't change anything like inside the organization, how we interact, how we build this continuous improvement processes, then 6 months down the line, they will end up with the same high bill and they will have to do this exercise again. Is it efficient? Probably not as much. Probably then we would have to look at the operational excellence pillar as well, because we would have to look at how do you perform operations in your organization? How do you automate? Do you use this infrastructure as the code? Do you use automated monitoring, alarming? Do you look at any anomalies across your usage and bill? And how do you sort of implement the remediation? So see, like seemingly we start from only one pillar, but then if nothing changes in this like mentality of the teams or of the organization, then we have to spend even more time to do this review again, and then ask additional questions. So now I'm sort of getting to the point of like how do we perform this kind of reviews, or which potential other tools, techniques are available, or what are the foundations, right? So some of the recommendations that we provide to customers, like if they don't know where to start and but they want to stop living this like firefighting mode, there are 3, I'd say, like basic best practices or things that you can do immediately. So one thing is to establish some sort of either architecture review board, or in some organizations, they make this cloud center of excellence, or it could be somebody like a central operations team, or it could be called cloud enablement team. So it has to be some sort of team that will be responsible for sharing these best practices across organization and across other teams. Assuming that, let's say, you have a large organization and multiple business units and multiple business teams that often operate like in silos and not necessarily talking to each other, then it's a good idea to have this kind of architecture review board and evangelize these best practices across the organization. Using any tools that are available for automated assessment, again, depending on the services that you utilize, some of the services will have their own kind of recommendations tools for that. And then thinking of how you can do governance at scale. So governance at scale is not an easy task, but there are some very simple, like foundational, I guess, things that you can do to ensure that as you scale, you don't run into blockers quickly, that you will have time to respond to any of the kind of potential scaling issues down the line. And referring back to like, let's say, finance and engineering teams speaking to each other. So very often the scaling problem in organizations comes from trying to find this balance between governance and control, controlling the budgets, controlling the permissions, controlling what like the teams can or cannot do, what they have or don't have access to, and kind of like the trade-offs between governance, control, and the agility. Because as I said, typically the development teams will want to experiment and move fast, launch new products quickly. So in the typical kind of traditional data center environment, this was obviously a bigger problem. But in the cloud and using AWS, you can actually have both. And yeah, you need to get those teams talking to each other, teams with potentially different kind of goals or outcomes. This is how you can establish this partnership between, let's say, business, finance, and engineering. And one, I guess, simple trick that I can give regarding scale and regarding doing it the right way from the very beginning, because we are talking about architecture here, right? And architecture is about designing it hopefully in the right way at the beginning, so that you could avoid more problems down the line when you start operating those workloads. Again, almost each of the slides in the presentation could be like its own talk. So like if anyone will have later questions, feel free to ask me later, and I'll be able to maybe expand on any of these concepts. But the baseline, the foundation is to have the right multi-account structure, the way how you combine your workloads into accounts, into organizational business units, and how do you manage them from governance and security perspective, who has access to what, and also how you review your bill. So one example is to use the AWS Organizations service. And I know that smaller companies often will use just one account for everything. They will use, let's say, one account for test and production and a couple of applications that they might have within that account. Even if you are starting small, we still recommend considering the right multi-account structure that will then help you grow and scale over time. Because you never know, even if you don't want to grow to the level of AWS, like as a company, for example, it might still happen. Your product, your idea, whatever you are doing can really take off. And then whenever you will get to the point when you have to scale, if you don't have these foundations set, it will be very difficult to change it later. So this is an example of like multi-account structure. Typically in the organization, you'll have a management payer account, and then you will have a couple of organizational units that will have accounts inside. And then on those accounts, then you have this kind of boundaries, right? You have specific applications, you have or specific environments like development, production, and test, ideally on different accounts. And then, yeah, you can sort of set up the structure depending on, the structure of your organization. So again, this is also where, like the business structure, it kind of reflects your like technical stack as well. So this is how you can separate some of those boundaries between all these different applications and workloads. And then, yeah, from the management payer account, you can use some of the tools and features where you apply governance, control, and of course, cost management, because this is from where you will be able to see the cost of everything else, of all the other accounts. And from the kind of linked member account level, this is where you do the development. Well, DevOps, where you create your workloads, and you also might want to give the visibility of the cost and of the sort of logging utilization metrics, like everything that you need to do with the workload, it can be done at the account level. So depending on the structure of your organization, you might decide to like put it into like different buckets. So these are the foundations, like the basics where you start from. If you do it right, then later down the line, it will just help you scale. And returning back to our well-architected best practices, so all the pillars have design principles and best practices that are specific to those pillars. However, the well-architected framework itself has the design principles that apply to all of the pillars. So when you architect, when you create workloads, these are the considerations that you need to keep in mind. Some of my favorite ones are the stop guessing your capacity needs. So you can think about it from different perspectives. Cost perspective, of course. If you over-provision, you'll have to pay for it. And it happens very often. Customers over-provision all the time. They never look back. They never review it. They never review it. And then they run into trouble, come to us and say, oh, we spent too much on AWS. What do we have to do? And again, the problem was originally probably that they didn't consider that capacity initially. They didn't do any sort of benchmarking before they started running anything on AWS. Or same with architectures. So like, for example, consider evolutionary architectures. So we often say that, oh, go serverless, it will save you money. However, it also depends on the type of workload that you have. And realistically, not all workloads will be suitable for serverless. So as I mentioned, so sort of architecture, so it's all about making the right architectural trade-offs. If you had to make like any takeaway from what I mentioned, so take a look at these best practices within the well-architected framework. Take a look at the well-architected tool. As I mentioned, the tool is free, and if you would be interested to run the well-architected reviews for some of your workloads, you could reach out. Oh no! So is it like the end? Let's go for lunch! Yay! Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, you can reach out to your account team. Most of you will have access either to a solution architect or account manager or technical account manager from the AWS side, and they will be able to guide you through this process and sort of help you achieve that sort of ultimate optimization. And this is kind of the last slide about doing this review. So sometimes customers say it takes too long to perform the well-architected review. Where do I start? What is the value? And the way how we position it usually is that yes, you will have to spend time and resources for the review, but consider then how do you improve whenever you will optimize your workload to perform it better in the right way and be more efficient. So this is where you will achieve that value, after the review process, after you implement the best practices and the recommendations that we provide. So as always, I run out of time, but yeah, we're sort of at the end of it. So if you would like to learn more, so I have additional resources here, so you can take a look. And feel free to reach out to me later, ask any questions. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Especially if you don't know who is your account team, like account manager, solution architect, we might be able to give you some hint, whom to reach out to ask for more help. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.